Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 3. We will present our discussion about linguistics, variety, and multilingual nations. Before we move on to the material, first let me introduce me and my members. My name is Anisa Azhari, and then we have Dinda Fadrinasesa and Riyanti, Aulia, Putri. There are several topics we are going to talk about. The first one is vernacular language, standard language, lingua franca, and then the last one, pidgins and creoles. The first topic will be explained by me, vernacular language. The term vernacular is used in a number of ways. However, it generally refers to a language which has not been standardized and which doesn't have official status. A non-standardized language means the language has not undergone substantial codification in grammar and usage, and it doesn't have official status because it is not employed by a population for public communication. When people talk about education in a vernacular language, for instance, they are usually referring to the education in an ethnic minority language in a particular country. In a multilingual speech community, the many different ethnic or tribal languages used by different groups are referred to as vernacular languages. Vernaculars are usually the first languages learned by people in multilingual communities, and they are often used for a relatively narrow range of informal function. From the definition, we can imply that there are three components of the meaning of the term vernacular. The first one, it is an uncodified or unstandardized variety, and then the second one, it refers to the way it is acquired, which is in home, as the first variety, and then the last one, it is the fact that it is used for relatively circumscribed functions. There are hundreds of vernacular language. Meanwhile, in Indonesia itself, we have so many of them, namely Javanese, Minangkabau, Sundanese, Balinese, and so on. Next, we move to the second topic, which is standard language. A standard variety is generally one which is written and which has undergone some degree of regularization or codification, for example, in a grammar and in a dictionary. It is also recognized as a prestigious variety or code by a community, and it is used for age functions alongside a diversity of L varieties. This means standard language is written, which means that it is the representation of a language by means of a writing systems, and it is printed in school books, newspapers, and in any other official documents. And standard language has undergone some degree of regularization or codification, which means the language has been codified and it is considered as a better one for its phonological, lexical, and grammatical correctness. And then it is recognized as a prestigious variety, and it is used for age functions because the language is used in official and formal situation, as in newspapers and public speeches. Standard languages arise when a certain dialect begins to be used in written form, normally throughout a broader area than that of the dialect itself. It is proven by the ways in which this language is used in administrative matters, literature, and economic life, lead to the minimization of linguistic variation. The example of standard language is Indonesian, English, French, Chinese, and so on, and many other official languages. We move to standard English. According to Peter Trudgill, standard English is that variety of English which is usually used in print and which is normally taught in schools and to non-native speakers learning the language. It is also the variety which is normally spoken by educated people and used in news broadcasts and other similar situations. From the definition, we can imply that the criterion of standard language, the first one, it is written variety, and then the second one, it is taught to non-native speakers in schools, and then the last one, it is normally spoken in a formal situation. Based on this, the word fun will be regarded as standard language because it is learned and taught to non-native speakers in school, and it is also printed in newspapers, magazines, and so on. Meanwhile, a word with similar meaning with fun, such as crack, will probably noted as unstandardized language because it is used exclusively by Irish English speakers. Besides, the word is not the one that is taught to English learners in other countries such as in Indonesia, China, and Jordan. Okay, we move to the next topic, lingua franca, which will be explained by Riyanti Aulia.
The next one is about lingua franca. A lingua franca is a language used for communication between people whose first languages differ, or it is also known as a bridge language, common language, third language, auxiliary language, vehicular language, or link language. Is a language or dialect systematically used to make communication possible between groups of people who do not share a native language or dialect, particularly when it is a third language that is distinct from both of the speaker's native languages. The example of lingua franca between the Colombian Indians, Tucano, is the main lingua franca, and it can be used with Indians who live in the Pampas area of the northwest Amazon on both sides of the borders between Colombia and Brazil. So, if Indians want to communicate with non-Indians in the area, they need a second language, franca, and since non-Indians rarely learn Tucano, then Colombian use Spanish and Brazilian use Portuguese. More generally, the term lingua franca describes a language serving as a regular means of communication between different linguistic groups in a multilingual speech community. Next, some countries, the most useful and widely used lingua franca is an official language or the national language. For example, in Tanzania, for instance, Swahili is the language people tend to choose first when they are speaking to someone from a different tribal group. And the other example, in the former Soviet Union, where about 100 different vernaculars were spoken, Russian served a lingua franca as well as being the national and official language of the Uni-Soviet. Then, in multilingual communities, lingua francas are so useful they may eventually displace the vernaculars. Vernaculars are usually the first languages learned by the people in multilingual communities, and they often used for a relatively narrow range of informal function. And for the example, when people from different ethnic groups marry in the Democratic Republic of the Congo Zaire, or Tanzania, or Papua New Guinea, they often use the lingua franca of their areas as the language of the home. And then their children may therefore learn very little of their fathers and mothers' vernaculars. Well, I think that's all about lingua franca. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, I'm Dinda Fadrinasesa, and I will explain to you about Pidgins and Creoles. Pidgin and Creoles are new languages that develop when speakers of different languages come into contact with each other and have a need to communicate. Pidgin is a language that has no native speaker and evolved as a means of communication between people who do not share the same language. It grows up among people who do not share a common language but want to communicate each other. Pidgin started to develop in areas where the colonists and traders come and settle. In addition, Pidgin arise when the less dominant group need to learn and communicate with the more dominant group. So, the less dominant group adopt a short of simple language with basic vocabulary of more dominant group language. For example, an English-speaking colonial has a sugar plantation, and they bring laborers from various different countries to their sugar plantation. Those people speak different languages. In order to communicate, they adopt English with simple language basic vocabulary of English and non-English grammar. And the last one is Creole. Creole is when pidgin language survive and become the native language of the next generation. For example, Haitian Creoles that based on mixing Arab, Chinese, and Malay languages. This Creole has the largest number of speakers with about 10 million native speakers. Okay, that's all about our topic today about linguistic varieties and multilingual nations. If you have any comments or any questions, you can ask us through the e-learning. Thank you very much and see ya!